When Sarah Mitchell answered the phone at 3:47 a.m., she heard her own voice on the other end, screaming words she'd never spoken, begging for help from a place she'd never been, describing events that hadn't happened yet. Before we continue, subscribe, drop a comment and turn on notifications, because I drop interesting stories like this always. The phone hadn't rung in 20 years. Not since Sarah's mother disconnected the landline in 2005, 3 days after the funeral. Not since they'd packed up the house on Meridian Street and moved 2 states away. Not since Sarah had watched her father's casket disappear into the frozen February ground. The phone itself sat in a cardboard box in Sarah's basement, wrapped in newspaper from March 2005. Headlines about a missing senator. Advertisements for flip phones. A world that no longer existed. But on the night of February 15, 2025, at exactly 3:47 a.m., it rang. Sarah woke to the sound cutting through her bedroom like a knife through silk. Sharp, insistent, impossible. She lay in the darkness of her Portland apartment, her heart hammering against her ribs, telling herself she was dreaming. The sound came again, and again. That specific trill of a rotary phone, a sound she hadn't heard in 2 decades, echoing up through the floor vents from the basement below. She found herself moving through her apartment in the dark, her feet cold against the hardwood, down the stairs, into the basement, the sound growing louder with each step. The box sat exactly where she'd left it 3 years ago when she'd moved in. Dust-covered, forgotten, but the ringing pulsed from inside it like a heartbeat. Sarah's hands trembled as she tore open the cardboard. The phone sat coiled inside, its beige plastic yellowed with age. The cord wasn't plugged into anything. There was no jack, no connection, no possible source of power. But it was ringing. She lifted the receiver. At first, there was only static, the kind of white noise that existed before the digital age, when distance and time could corrupt a signal. Then, through the interference, she heard breathing. Slow, deliberate, the breathing of someone who knew they were being listened to. "Hello!" Sarah's voice cracked. The static shifted, reformed, and then she heard it. Her own voice. "Please, you have to listen to me. I don't have much time. He's coming back. He knows I'm calling. You have to stop him before he finds the others." Sarah dropped the phone. It clattered against the concrete floor, the receiver bouncing once, twice. But the voice kept talking, tinny and distant, speaking words Sarah had never said. "Check the walls. Behind the wallpaper in the house on Meridian Street. That's where he kept the recordings. That's where it all started. You have to go back, Sarah. You have to go back before the anniversary." The line went dead. Sarah stood in her basement for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at the phone on the floor. The rational part of her mind cycled through explanations. Malfunction, prank, psychotic break. But the voice had known her name, had known about Meridian Street, had sounded exactly like her, down to the slight lisp on her S's, the way she swallowed between sentences when she was afraid. She didn't sleep that night. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray through her windows, Sarah made a decision that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her father, her childhood, and the house where she'd grown up. She booked a flight to Wisconsin. The house on Meridian Street sat exactly as she remembered it, though smaller somehow, the way childhood places always shrink when viewed through adult eyes. The new owners had painted it blue. It had been white when her family lived there. They'd added a fence. A swing set rusted in the backyard. Sarah sat in her rental car across the street for 30 minutes, watching. A woman came out to collect the mail. 2 kids, maybe 6 and 8, pressed their faces against the living room window. Normal. Utterly, devastatingly normal. She couldn't just knock on the door and ask to tear apart their walls. Instead, she waited until dark. The streetlights on Meridian flickered on at 6:47 p.m. Sarah watched the family through the windows as they ate dinner, as they settled in front of a television, as the lights slowly began to go out, room by room. By 11 p.m., the house was dark. She'd purchased a crowbar at a hardware store that afternoon. She'd told the clerk she was doing renovations. He'd smiled and wished her luck. Now the crowbar sat heavy in her hands as she approached the back door. Sarah had never broken into anything in her life. She'd never stolen, never trespassed, never even jaywalked without guilt churning in her stomach. But the voice on the phone had been her own. And something about that impossibility overrode everything else. The back door lock was new, but the frame was the same wood from 20 years ago. It splintered on the third hit. The house smelled different. New carpet, different detergent. Someone else's life layered over the ghost of hers. Sarah moved through the kitchen with her phone flashlight, her heart threatening to break through her chest. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. The room had been hers. Second floor, corner bedroom, facing the street. She'd had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. A poster of a boy band she couldn't remember the name of. A window seat where she'd read books and watched the neighborhood. The new owners had made it into an office. Sarah closed the door behind her and turned to the wall. The same wall where her bed had been. Where she'd slept for 15 years. From age 3 to 18, never knowing what was hidden behind it. The wallpaper was different now. Stripes instead of the floral pattern she remembered. But underneath, the walls were the same. She wedged the crowbar behind the desk and pulled. The wallpaper tore. Then the drywall. Then, her flashlight caught something. A gap. A hollow space between the studs. Sarah's hands were bleeding as she pulled away more drywall. Dust and debris falling around her feet. The gap went deeper than it should have. Someone had modified the wall, had created a space that shouldn't exist. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were the cassette tapes. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Each one labeled with dates. The earliest from 1987. The most recent from February 2005. The date her father died. Sarah pulled one out at random. December 1998. Her handwriting on the label, but she'd never written it. She'd never even seen these tapes. She grabbed as many as she could fit in her backpack and ran. The motel room was cheap and anonymous, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Sarah spread the tapes across the bed and stared at them. Decades of secrets in plastic cases. She'd found a cassette player at a thrift store that afternoon. Her hands shook as she loaded the first tape. Static. Then her father's voice. Session 47. December 3, 1998. Subject remains responsive to suggestion. Memory implantation successful. Sarah now believes the incident with the neighbor's dog was her fault. She cried for 2 hours. Guilt response optimal. Sarah's stomach turned to ice. The key is repetition. Her father's voice continued, clinical and detached. Night after night while she sleeps. The subconscious accepts what the conscious mind would reject. I've been playing the suggestions through the speaker system I installed in her walls. She has no idea. None of them do. Sarah ejected the tape with trembling hands and loaded another. Then another. Each one worse than the last. Her father had been a psychiatrist. Respected. Published. He'd written books about childhood development and memory formation. What Sarah discovered in those tapes was that his research hadn't been theoretical. He'd been experimenting on his own daughter. For years, he'd played recordings while she slept. Suggestions. Implanted memories. Emotional manipulation. He'd made her believe things that never happened. Made her afraid of things that weren't real. Shaped her personality, her fears, her guilt like clay. But it was the final tape that broke her. February 14, 2005. The day before he died. This is the last session. Sarah is 18 now, moving away to college. The experiment is complete. She believes she is responsible for her mother's unhappiness. She believes she is inherently flawed. She will carry the guilt I've programmed into her for the rest of her life. But I've made one mistake. Static crackled. I've kept these tapes. I should destroy them, but I can't. They're the proof of my greatest work. So I'm hiding them. Someday perhaps they'll be discovered. Perhaps by Sarah herself. And when that day comes, she'll finally understand what she really is. A pause. Then, barely a whisper. An invention. Not a daughter. An experiment. The perfect subject. The tape ended. Sarah sat on the motel bed, surrounded by the evidence of her father's crimes, and realized that nothing about her life had ever been real. Every fear, every guilt, every moment of self-doubt and self-hatred, all of it had been programmed into her mind while she slept, night after night, year after year, by the man who was supposed to protect her. She thought about the phone call, her own voice warning her, but that was impossible, unless her hands were still shaking as she loaded the tape labeled February 15th, 2025. But the tape was blank. Nothing recorded yet. Yet, Sarah's mind reeled. She pulled out every tape, checking dates. They were all there, leading up to yesterday. But nothing for today. Nothing for tomorrow. Except one. At the bottom of the pile, wrapped differently than the others in newer plastic. The label read, "For Sarah. Play this last." She loaded it. Her own voice came through the speaker, but older. Tired. "If you're hearing this, then you found the tapes. Good. That means I succeeded. You need to know the truth, Sarah. All of it." Sarah's blood went cold. "Dad didn't die in a car accident. I killed him. You killed him. We killed him. However you want to think about it. When I was 18, when you are 18, I found these tapes. Just like you're finding them now. And I confronted him. He laughed. Said I was proof of his genius. Said he'd publish the results, make me famous. Make himself famous." The voice paused, and Sarah heard herself breathing on the recording. "So I pushed him down the stairs. I watched him fall. And I've spent 20 years living with what I did. But the guilt isn't mine, Sarah. It's his. He programmed it into me, into you. Every terrible thing you feel about yourself is his design." Sarah's hands pressed against her mouth. "I'm 58 now. I have maybe a year left. Cancer. The doctors say it's genetic, but I think it's the weight of carrying this secret. So I'm giving you a choice I never had. I've figured out how to use his research, how to create suggestions that work across time, through quantum entanglement of consciousness. Don't ask me to explain the physics, I barely understand it myself. But I can send messages back to you. I can warn you. I can change things." The tape crackled. "The phone will ring at 3:47 a.m. on February 15th, 2025. Answer it. Find the tapes. But here's the choice, Sarah. You can destroy them and never tell anyone. Live with the knowledge alone like I did. Or you can expose him. Tell the world what he did. Destroy his legacy. Destroy the guilt he built into us. Silence. Then. But know this, if you expose him, you'll have to admit what you are. What we are. An experiment. A constructed personality. How much of you is really you and how much is his programming? Can you live with that question? Couldn't. That's why I'm sending this back. To give you the choice I was too afraid to make." The tape ended. Sarah sat in the silence of the motel room, the weight of 20 years and 2 lifetimes pressing down on her. She burned the tapes, every single one, in a barrel behind the motel, feeding them one by one into the flames. She watched her father's voice turn to smoke and ash, watched the proof of his crimes disappear into the February night. Took her 3 hours. When she was done, Sarah drove back to the house on Meridian Street. She parked the crowbar against the back door, a silent confession. Then she called the police and reported a break-in. Anonymous tip. She was 2 states away before they arrived. Back in Portland, Sarah disconnected her phone. All of them. Landline she didn't have, cell phone in a drawer, turned off. No more calls from the future. No more warnings from a life she might live or might avoid. She made an appointment with a therapist. A real one, with credentials and ethics and no relation to her father. In their first session, Sarah sat in the chair and said, "I don't know how much of me is real." The therapist asked her to explain. And for the first time in her life, Sarah started to tell the truth. 3 weeks later, Sarah was sorting through mail when she found the envelope. No return address. Postmarked from Wisconsin. Inside was a single photograph. Her father, standing in front of the house on Meridian Street. But he was old in the photo. 70, maybe 80. The photo was dated 2035. On the back, in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Some timelines, you don't kill him. Some timelines, he gets away with it. Some timelines, you expose him and he goes to prison. The tapes showed me all the possibilities. I'm living in the worst one. Don't make my mistakes. SM. Sarah burned that photograph too. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, she'd lie in bed and wonder about the voice on the phone. About the tape labeled with today's date. About all the versions of herself scattered across timelines and possibilities, each one making different choices, each one living with different regrets. She wondered if any of them were free. She wondered if any of them were real. And in the basement of her apartment, wrapped in newspaper and packed away in cardboard, the phone sat silent. For now. But Sarah knew, with the certainty of programmed fear or genuine intuition, she could no longer tell the difference, that someday it would ring again. And when it did, she'd have to decide if the voice on the other end was warning her or damning her. If it was salvation or another layer of control. If she was choosing her own path or following a script written before she was born. The phone sat silent. Sarah waited. And in the walls of a house 2 states away, in a space that no longer existed behind drywall that had been repaired, in a timeline that maybe never happened, the echoes of her father's voice played on a loop that only she could hear. Some programming she was learning went deeper than consciousness. Some experiments never really end. Some daughters never stop being subjects. The phone sat silent. But silence, Sarah had learned, was just another kind of message. And she was still learning how to read it. On February 15, 2026, exactly 1 year after the phone first rang, Sarah stands in her basement at 3:46 a.m., watching the clock tick toward the moment. The phone sits in front of her, still disconnected, still impossible. She spent the year in therapy, rebuilding herself piece by piece, trying to separate the programmed responses from genuine feeling. She's been happy sometimes, sad sometimes, angry and confused and hopeful. She doesn't know if any of it is real. At 3:47 a.m., the phone rings. Sarah's hand hovers over the receiver. This time, she doesn't answer. This time, she chooses silence. The phone rings 17 times, then stops. In the sudden quiet, Sarah realizes something. Maybe it doesn't matter how much of her was programmed and how much was real. Maybe the only thing that matters is what she chooses to do next. She picks up the phone, not to answer it, but to rip it from its cradle. She carries it outside into the February cold. And she buries it in the garden behind her apartment, 6 feet deep, wrapped in plastic and covered with dirt, and the promise that some ghosts deserve to stay buried. When she comes back inside, her hands are covered in soil and her breath makes clouds in the freezing air. She feels afraid. She feels free. She doesn't know if the difference matters anymore. Somewhere, in another timeline, another Sarah makes another choice. Somewhere, her father's work continues. Somewhere, the phone keeps ringing. But here, in this moment, in this timeline, Sarah Mitchell goes back to bed. And for the first time in 20 years, she sleeps without dreaming.